Story 1. Backstory. At the time, we were living about 26 miles west of Oxford. When my son was young, about 5 years old, he had to attend a school with a speech unit located in Oxford. The school was 26 miles away, and during rush hour, the commute took about 45 minutes. Because this was part of his official schooling, the county council covered the cost of transport. For the first year, the transportation provided was a taxi. This arrangement worked well. The driver would pick my son up at 7:45 in the morning, which was his scheduled time. At that stage, the earliest primary school children were allowed to start their school day was 7:30 in the morning. This detail will become important later. I bought my son a Walkman so he could listen to books on tape during the taxi ride. Sometimes the kind driver would ask me in advance if it was okay for him to give his elderly neighbor a lift to the hospital while still transporting my son. I always agreed, as public transport in our area was almost non-existent, and I appreciated that he asked first. The entire first year went smoothly. Minibus with an entitled driver. Every school year, the transportation contracts were put out to tender. So, the following year, my son's reliable taxi service was replaced by a minibus with a new driver who turned out to be rather entitled. After just the first week back at school, I knew we were going to have problems. The new driver would show up anytime between 7:15 and 7:35. I asked him several times to arrive at the same time every day, but he never did. He was scheduled to pick my son up at 7:45 and then collect 2 other children. Well, there was simply no way he could pick my son up at 7:45, then drive another 10 miles to pick up the second pupil, another 15 miles for the third, and finally drive 5 miles in rush hour traffic on the A34 and still arrive at school on time. It just wasn't possible. After the first month, the situation worsened. The minibus began to smell strongly of cigarette smoke when he arrived. By the beginning of November, things really came to a head. I had noticed that my son was becoming more anxious and stressed, which should have been a red flag to me much sooner. One day, I checked my son's head and noticed he had 2 bald spots, each just over 2 inches in size. I didn't say anything to him at the time, but I immediately booked a doctor's appointment for that very day. The doctor told me that the hair might not grow back. I wasn't sure if he was just preparing me for the worst-case scenario or if he genuinely believed it. Fortunately, that same morning there had been a segment on breakfast television about alopecia. Because of that, I didn't panic. I concluded that my son's hair loss was stress-related and that it would likely grow back. I also came up with a plan of action. The very next day, the driver arrived at 7:15 in the morning. I told my son to stay inside the house, and I went out to speak to the driver myself. I firmly told him that my son was not leaving the house until 7:30. The driver became demanding, insisting that my son come out immediately. I refused. Then, he demanded to speak to my husband. I explained that my husband was sleeping, but the driver kept pushing. Eventually, I went inside to see if my husband would at least come to the door. However, he wouldn't get out of bed and instead told me he agreed with my decision. The driver, clearly frustrated, drove to a nearby payphone to call his boss. By the time he came back, it was already 7:30, so I allowed my son to leave for school then. The driver and his boss ended up complaining to the school, accusing me of making them late. However, I don't think they really thought that accusation through. According to their contract, they were not allowed to pick my son up before 7:45. The following week, letters were sent out to all the parents with the official schedule attached. From that point forward, the driver finally began arriving at 7:45 every day. If my son's teacher or the school had ever told me that he was arriving late, I could have explained exactly why. Instead, they only had the driver's version of events. To make things worse, his teacher would often stress to the entire class how important it was to arrive at school on time. Meanwhile, my son was becoming increasingly stressed because the minibus was late. In reality, it wasn't late at all. He wasn't supposed to leave the house before 7:45. But because of the driver's actions, my son was left feeling guilty and anxious about something that wasn't his fault. Looking back, I honestly don't know what bothered me more: the strong smell of smoke in the vehicle or the fact that the driver kept demanding to speak to my husband, as though my words weren't good enough. Both situations were upsetting, but if I had to choose, I would say the smoking issue was worse. I only had two reasonable requests: that the driver show up at the same time every day, and that he refrain from smoking in the vehicle. He refused to respect either of those requests. At that point, I decided to withdraw my son from the minibus service altogether and arrange for him to be transported by taxi again. Note: the only realistic way for the driver to pick my son up at 7:45 and still arrive at school on time was to drive over Boars Hill and avoid the A34. However, because of where the third child lived, the driver was forced to use the A34, which made it nearly impossible to stick to the schedule without cutting corners. Story 2. After seeing many posts from the student perspective about standardized testing, I thought I would share one from the teacher's perspective. This incident is a big part of why I eventually chose to teach preschool rather than continue working in public education. At the time, I was finishing my degree in early childhood education, which required me to spend an entire year in a classroom setting. During the first half of the year, I observed and taught while the classroom teacher remained in the room. During the second half, I taught on my own. That also meant I was responsible for administering the state-mandated standardized test in the spring. I have disliked standardized testing ever since the very first one I had to take as a student. From a teacher's point of view, I dislike them even more. They do not accurately measure true understanding. They take away the ability to teach fun and creative lessons since everything must align with a standard, and they are stressful, and in my opinion, even harmful to students. My biggest issue with these tests is that every student must take the grade level version, regardless of their actual learning level. I had students who were reading at a first grade level, receiving interventions to help them catch up. Yet they were expected to read and comprehend the entire test on their own, while still being scored as if they were at grade level. It frustrated me to see schools use these scores to define students. While some students are given waivers or special assistance during the test, the number of exceptions allowed is limited based on school enrollment. These are reserved only for the most significantly impaired students, leaving many struggling children without support. The week before the test, I was handed a packet detailing what I was supposed to review with my students to ensure best test performance, along with another packet explaining how to administer the exam. The instructions were very rigid: read the test introduction, show students how to fill in the answer bubbles, encourage them to make their best guess when unsure, and a few other scripted points. Once the test officially started, I was not allowed to answer questions or clarify anything. The only thing I was permitted to do was reread the general instructions to students if they asked for help. Nowhere in the packet, however, did it specify how the instructions had to be read. On test day, as expected, several of my students who normally received additional support struggled immediately. They had difficulty understanding the reading passages well enough to even know what the questions were asking. Math was especially difficult for one student in particular, and that was where I decided to quietly practice what could be called malicious compliance. Story 3. A little bit of backstory. I used to live in Wisconsin, where snow can create slipping hazards in certain department stores. So, one Sunday night, I was headed home from church, and I decided to stop by Walmart to pick up a large storage bin. I was getting ready to move and wanted to be prepared. Anyway, I made my way over to the storage bin aisle, trying to find the largest bin they had, when all of a sudden this rather large woman huffed up to me and snapped her fingers. She told me I needed to follow her and help her lift whatever item she couldn't manage on her own. Me. "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't work here." Huffing and puffing, she replied, "Well, obviously you work here because you're wearing a tie." I had on a button-up shirt, tie, and khakis because I had just gotten out of church. For some reason, to her, wearing a tie meant I worked at Walmart. Me? Nope, sorry, I just got out of church, which is why I'm dressed up. I thought that sounded pretty reasonable. But lo and behold, it was as if I had opened up the gates of trouble, and this lady was about to unleash her fury. I don't care where you came from. All I want from you is to lift my item into my cart. Now, get over here before I get your manager and have you fired. I'm a pretty laid-back guy, but at this point, I snapped back at her. Listen, lady, I do not work here. Now leave me alone and let me find my bin in peace. At this point, I grabbed the largest bin I saw. It wasn't heavy, but was rather awkward to carry. I headed to the checkout line when I noticed her following behind me, still yelling insults and saying she was going to have me fired. I was a good 20 to 25 feet ahead of her, but she picked up speed and started narrowing the gap. She was honing in on me like a cheetah about to take down its prey. Honestly, I was concerned about what she might do if she caught up to me. By now, we had already attracted a few curious eyes from shoppers who were wondering what all the commotion was about. I looked around for an actual manager or employee to step in and help me. At this point, I was about ready to drop my storage bin and make a run for the exit when all of a sudden, a miracle happened. Remember how I said it snows a lot where I'm from and creates slipping hazards? Well, she was going a little too fast and slipped on a puddle. She fell hard, and I guarantee the impact could have registered on the Richter scale. The sound that escaped her lips when she hit the ground was a cross between a moose bellow and a humpback whale's mating call. That sound still occasionally haunts my dreams. A little bit of backstory. I used to live in Wisconsin, where snow can create slipping hazards in certain department stores. So, one Sunday night, I was headed home from church, and I decided to stop by Walmart to pick up a large storage bin. I was getting ready to move and wanted to be prepared. Anyway, I made my way over to the storage bin aisle, trying to find the largest bin they had, when all of a sudden this rather large woman huffed up to me and snapped her fingers. She told me I needed to follow her and help her lift whatever item she couldn't manage on her own. Me. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't work here. Huffing and puffing, she replied, well, obviously you work here because you're wearing a tie. I had on a button-up shirt, tie, and khakis because I had just gotten out of church. For some reason, to her, wearing a tie meant I worked at Walmart. Me. Nope, sorry. I just got out of church, which is why I'm dressed up. I thought that sounded pretty reasonable. But lo and behold, it was as if I had opened up the gates of trouble, and this lady was about to unleash her fury. I don't care where you came from. All I want from you is to lift my item into my cart. Now, get over here before I get your manager and have you fired. I'm a pretty laid-back guy, but at this point, I snapped back at her. Listen, lady, I do not work here. Now leave me alone and let me find my bin in peace. At this point, I grabbed the largest bin I saw. It wasn't heavy, but was rather awkward to carry. I headed to the checkout line when I noticed her following behind me, still yelling insults and saying she was going to have me fired. I was a good 20 to 25 feet ahead of her, but she picked up speed and started narrowing the gap. She was honing in on me like a cheetah about to take down its prey. Honestly, I was concerned about what she might do if she caught up to me. By now, we had already attracted a few curious eyes from shoppers who were wondering what all the commotion was about. I looked around for an actual manager or employee to step in and help me. At this point, I was about ready to drop my storage bin and make a run for the exit when all of a sudden, a miracle happened. Remember how I said it snows a lot where I'm from and creates slipping hazards? Well, she was going a little too fast and slipped on a puddle. She fell hard, and I guarantee the impact could have registered on the Richter scale. The sound that escaped her lips when she hit the ground was a cross between a moose bellow and a humpback whale's mating call. That sound still occasionally haunts my dreams. Story 4. Hello, people. I've never posted in this community before, but I figured someone might enjoy this story. Also, a small note. This lady did have a kid with her, but based on how old she appeared and how young he was, I think she was his grandmother and not his parent. That's why I'm posting here instead of in a community dedicated to entitled parents. Now, onto the story. So, about 7 years ago, when I was just a freshman in high school, I was in the school band. My band program, along with a few others, had a yearly trip to Disney. You would do fundraisers and other activities to raise money for your ticket and hotel contribution. Since the arrangement was 4 kids per room, a 2-bedroom room split between 4 people wasn't too expensive. We also got to pick groups of 4 to be in the parks with. This was a 4-day trip, including the travel days. Well, my friends and I lucked out because we only had 3 of us in our group. We were thrilled to go have fun together and just hang out. Being the kind of person I am, and having a dad who spent all year saving for family trips, even when it was just camping, he'd want us to go to a few different places, decided to surprise my friends by booking a reservation for lunch at a restaurant that only took reservations. Now, the restaurant I chose for this special meal is one of my favorites. It's the one that a certain pirate-themed ride goes through at the beginning, and every single item on the menu was very expensive. We arrived for our mid-afternoon reservation, which I had kept a surprise until it was time to head over, and lo and behold, Karen was right behind us. My friends didn't say much during all this, so I won't include their names, but Karen definitely had plenty to say. "You kids should probably just leave since you won't be able to afford this place anyway," Karen told me. I simply replied, cool. Karen then cut in front of me and my friends and walked up to the hostess with her grandchild in tow. "I'd like a table for 3, and a kids' menu as well," she demanded. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't do walk-ins. It's reservation only," the hostess replied. "No, it's not. Last year we were able to do a walk-in," Karen insisted. "Yes, ma'am, last year we did allow walk-ins. But at the start of the new year, the policy changed." Without another word, the server turned to us and asked if we had a reservation, to which I replied yes, giving my name. "Alrighty, if you'll follow me, we have a table ready for you." When I say Karen lost her composure, I mean it. She started sputtering and stuttering, and she didn't know what to do. From what I remember, she wasn't even able to get out another proper sentence. We just heard her yelling nonsense as we followed the hostess to our table. She wasn't there when we left, but since our table was close to the entrance, I could hear nearby security calmly telling her to leave the restaurant or else she would be escorted off the property. We didn't see her again while we were eating, and honestly, that made the experience so much better. We enjoyed our meal, which I paid for entirely as a gift to my friends. The bill came to a whopping $127, and I tipped our waiter another $30, bringing the total to $157. It was worth every penny for the memory, the atmosphere, and of course, seeing Karen's plan fail so spectacularly. Later that evening, a few hours after we had finished at the restaurant, we saw Karen again. This time she was waiting in line and loudly complaining about the fast pass system. She was shouting about how unfair it was, while a woman standing nearby, who I assume was either the actual mother of the child or possibly an employee, looked absolutely embarrassed and annoyed by Karen's behavior. It was clear that wherever she went that day, she caused a scene, but at least for us, it turned into one of those funny memories that my friends and I still laugh about years later. Story 5. So this story begins many years ago, back when the world was new. Well, it was like 12 years ago. My aunt, for the sake of anonymity we'll call her Helga, got pregnant with her daughter, Peach, and married her Air Force husband Carl. She was in college, and she stayed there up until 2 years ago. Her loan amount was too high, and they stopped providing her with loans. It was over 100 grand at this point. She has no degree to speak of. Last time she had a consistent job was 20-ish years ago. Well, last year, it came out that Helga and Carl were getting a divorce. Carl moved out of the house and moved back in with his parents in the same state as me in the Pacific Northwest, while she stayed in the Midwest. Carl has been doing his best to be fair with custody. He was even giving my grandmother a couple weeks to have her only granddaughter. He was also paying hefty alimony. That was until about 4 months ago, when it came out that she had moved her unemployed boyfriend in, which meant Carl no longer had to pay alimony and received near full custody. This is where things get worse. She went to court to try and get the alimony resumed and claimed she hadn't moved her boyfriend in. But her daughter and neighbor both signed letters saying she did. She is now asking our grandparents for help financially. Well, help really isn't the right word. She wants my grandparents to buy her home and pay off her student loans. My grandparents agreed, on the condition that she gets a job to pay them back and pay rent. She found this to be an unacceptable trade-off and has not spoken to my grandparents in months, which is taking a toll on my grandfather. My grandfather has leukemia, and the stress from this has visibly aged him. Not to mention, ruined the relationship between my grandmother and Carl. I feel like the worst part is my grandparents are already struggling financially. My grandmother works at a high school as a paraeducator for students with disabilities, and my grandfather retired years ago due to crippling Crohn's disease. They really can't afford a debt like that. It's been almost 2 months since she's spoken to my grandparents, and she's spent it trying to convince my mother that my grandparents are selfish and abusive. I almost forgot to mention, 2 weeks ago, I got a text from my mom asking me if she'd talk to me. When I asked why, she said that my aunt expected her or me to take a week off work and fly down to her state with Peach, because my 11-year-old cousin shouldn't be flying alone. She expected us to pay for a round-trip flight for whoever went down the first week of July and the second week of September, the week before Peach goes back to school. There has been so much more, but it all seems small compared to this. Story 6. By morning I was completely exhausted, and I'm not sure if I updated everyone on the situation since this happened back in 2024. I had blocked and barricaded my door so that my cousins couldn't enter while I was asleep. Cousin C has a habit of stealing, and I couldn't risk any of my valuables being taken while I rested. She wasn't very strong at the time, but she was almost 7. One of my aunts tried to get into my room in the morning, but quickly realized the door was stuck. Around 6 or 7, she began pounding on the door to wake me up. I'll refer to the aunts as Aunt A, Aunt B, and Aunt C. Aunt B was the one we were hosting the baby shower for, while Aunt A was the one who showed up the night before with all 3 of her children. Aunt A was the one knocking loudly at my door to wake me. She was there to get me up so we could grab breakfast together. I had only 10 minutes to get dressed. Luckily, I was still in my clothes from the night before. I know that sounds a little gross, but I was so tired, I had to quickly get ready, be in the car, and head to McDonald's. Cousin A and Cousin B were still asleep, but Cousin C was wide awake since her dad made her go to sleep earlier than her brothers. In the car, my mom scolded me for wearing the same clothes as the day before and shamed me for my behavior. I was also reprimanded for not helping decorate the house, even though I had a large amount of schoolwork to do. On top of that, she scolded me for locking my cousins out of the room and being mean to them. But if you read the last story, you'd know I had to kick them out because they destroyed my freshly cleaned room. Cousin B even tried to break my Chromebook. Cousin C attempted to steal my jewelry, and Cousin A, the oldest, tried to take my money. I mostly tuned out my mom since I was tired and just wanted to celebrate my aunt's firstborn. For context, this was my aunt's rainbow baby, which made it even more meaningful to us. When we got to McDonald's, I quickly ordered food because I still needed to shower, pick out an outfit, and do my makeup. Everyone with us that morning was Aunt A, Aunt C, my grandma, my mom, and Cousin C. While we waited, Cousin C started crying loudly because she wanted to play in the indoor playground. My grandma then told me, "Go watch your cousin in the playground, and this time, be nice to her." So I followed her into the play area, just standing there to make sure she was okay. Honestly, I wasn't really sure what the point was because I couldn't enter the structure myself since I was too tall. My cousin then threw a tantrum because I wouldn't climb up the steps and chase after her. I reassured her that we could still have fun without me going inside, but she scattered off into the playground. Right before the food arrived, my mom scolded me for losing her, even though I was right there watching. Just as the food came, Cousin C sprinted out of the playground, sat down, and immediately complained about the food she got. She started crying again, saying she was hungry and didn't have any food. Her mom got up and ordered something else for her, while Cousin C just smiled at me and ran back to the playground. I kept eating, satisfied with what I had, while Aunt C got up to keep an eye on her despite the fact there was a giant window next to us. By the time Aunt A returned, Cousin C no longer wanted to eat. During this time, my mom started scolding me again, this time about how I broke our side gate and how I owed her money. This was right after she had taken $100 from me to transfer into my bank account. She promised to put it in my account since it was safer there than keeping it at home. Before we left, Cousin B called Aunt A from his tablet, demanding food. To be fair, it was reasonable. He was in an unfamiliar place without food or water, and he was the first one awake. But the way he demanded things was a bit much, yelling things like, "Bring me pancakes right now," or "No, I don't want milk, I want orange juice now." My grandma had to step in, telling him to watch his tone and reminding him that we were 15 to 20 minutes away, so he had to wait. Eventually, we got into the car to leave. My mom stayed back to grab the cake, salad, and some extra decorations. By the time we were halfway there, I checked my bank account, but the money still hadn't been transferred. When I mentioned it to my aunts and grandma, they said, "Looks like your mom forgot to put your money in again." For context, the gate really was broken. I had closed it a little harder than usual, and the wire around the lock snapped. Also, my bank updates instantly when money is added, so I knew it wasn't there. I started getting stressed because sometimes my mom really does take my money. Thankfully, after I repeatedly reminded her, she eventually transferred the full $100 into my account. She claimed she simply forgot, but at least I finally got it back. When I finally got home, cousins A and B were eating pizza for breakfast, while their dad was coming out of my shower. They were almost done getting ready for the baby shower, so I hopped in next. That's when I noticed they had used my bars of soap. I keep 2 separate bars, one for washing my hands after a shower and one specifically for my body. Both were noticeably used up, and I was very upset because I'm particular about cleanliness and hygiene. I threw both bars away using gloves and had to replace them with 2 new ones. I then had to leave the bathroom because my aunt needed it to do Cousin C's hair. She straightened and curled it, then even applied some makeup to both herself and her 5-year-old daughter. Thankfully, I was already dressed, but I still needed to do my makeup. Since I couldn't use my bathroom, I went downstairs to my parents' room instead. There, I met Aunt B's future mother-in-law for the first time. She seemed kind and even complimented my outfit and eyes, saying she loved dark brown, almond-shaped eyes. Her kindness made me feel good, and I walked into my parents' room on cloud 9, almost forgetting where I was. But as soon as I entered, my mom immediately criticized me, saying my shirt was ugly and making me change it. That made me sad, but it got worse when she then said, "Don't put on too much makeup, otherwise you'll look trashy." I ended up altering my makeup look just to keep her happy. By the time I finished getting ready, the party was starting, and my mom had just finished setting up the food on the counter. Not long after, Cousin C asked if she could have a cupcake. As usual, my mom gave in to her favorite niece at the time and handed her one. For context, there were 3 towers of 10 cupcakes each, plus the main cake. About 40 people showed up, and it quickly became clear there weren't enough cupcakes for everyone. Thankfully, there was enough cake to make up for it. Within 20 to 30 minutes, Cousin C had eaten an entire tower of cupcakes and then moved on to the second one. When my dad noticed, since he came to check on me and the cousins, he told her no more cupcakes. Instead of listening, she started chugging soda. I'm talking almost 2 liters of Sprite. I decided it wasn't my business and started playing Roblox with Cousin A. Cousin B asked to join, and we agreed, just to keep him from causing chaos. When we asked Cousin C to join, she refused, so we continued without her and played a game called a Dusty Trip. For context, a Dusty Trip has private servers, meaning no one can join unless they're invited. After playing for a few minutes, I saw Cousin C sneak 2 more cupcakes from the second tower. I went over, crouched down to her level, and said, "Cousin C, did you hear what my dad said earlier? He said no more cupcakes. Let's wait for cake, okay? If we take more, there won't be enough for everyone else. As you can imagine, she didn't like being told no. She put the cupcakes down, but the moment I sat back down, she began crying loudly. Her wails were so loud that everyone rushed in from the other room. My grandma's first reaction was to blame us, saying, "Now what did you three do to Cousin C?" When I stood up to explain, I started with, "My dad told us no more cupcakes, and Cousin C got up to take one, but before I could finish, my grandma cut me off. She loudly declared, in front of all the guests, 'So you took the cupcakes out of your cousin's hand and put them back?' I was mortified. I tried to defend myself, explaining, 'No, I told her to put them back and that we'd wait for cake.' Thankfully, my mom came to my defense and even argued with my grandma about how Cousin C never listens. But instead of apologizing to me, my grandma handed Cousin C another cupcake. My cousin smirked at me as if she had won, and everything went back to how it was. Later, she threw another tantrum because we had played Roblox without her. We explained that she couldn't join until we all left the server, but by then, she had started playing dress to impress instead. Within an hour or two, Cousin A and Cousin B started fighting. I think Cousin A may have punched Cousin B, which led to Cousin B crying. My mom had to step in and deal with their argument. Not long after that, it was cake time. Cousin C wanted more cupcakes, but had fallen asleep on the couch. Everyone gathered around to take photos with Aunt B and the cake, which was decorated with a wilderness theme and little animals all over it. It was adorable, and since my aunt was due in just a few weeks, everyone wanted pictures of her baby bump, and the cake. While we were still taking photos, Aunta got impatient. After waiting only 5 minutes, she grabbed the knife out of Aunt B's hands and started cutting the cake for herself and others, cutting short the picture taking. I wish I was joking, but she really did that. I felt bad because it was supposed to be Aunt B's special day, celebrating her soon-to-arrive daughter, and yet people around her kept making the moment about themselves. Eventually, it was time for presents. I sat with my grandma as Cousin C slept in her lap. After a while, I got up to grab a drink, which accidentally woke Cousin C. She immediately started crying loudly. Now, I'm going to give a little warning here, it's kind of unpleasant. If you don't like topics about accidents, you may want to skip ahead. While Cousin C had been sleeping, she had an accident on the couch. Neither my grandma nor I noticed until I stood up. Somehow, she had managed to wet the couch in such a way that it spread from the back to the front. Thankfully, none of it got on me, but it was still a big mess. Aunt B had to pause opening her gifts with her fiancé so Cousin C could be changed, while my grandma stayed behind to keep an eye on the rest of the presents. By the time my grandma returned, only a few gifts remained. Cousin C started crying again, this time because she wanted to open presents too. She was upset that there weren't any specifically for her, and that she hadn't been allowed to open any. To calm her down, Aunt B invited her to help open the rest of the gifts. The tears stopped immediately, and she happily joined in. The day felt never-ending, but things eventually began to settle down. At some point during the party, someone from my side of the family made a statement that really bothered me. I don't recall exactly who it was, but I know it was one of the aunties. The comment was along the lines of, "I wonder how dark the baby is going to be. I hope she has dark skin and black hair, not pale skin or light hair." For context, my family is black, and Aunt B's fiancé is white. Hearing that kind of remark, especially at a baby shower, felt inappropriate and, in my opinion, racially insensitive. It made me uncomfortable that such a thing was said so casually in front of others. By the end of the celebration, I honestly wasn't even sure who was being the most entitled. It felt like a mixture of entitlement and pure chaos coming from multiple directions, whether it was the kids throwing tantrums, my grandma taking sides, or the adults making the event about themselves. Now Aunt C is currently pregnant, and her baby shower is coming up soon. This time my family isn't hosting, which I think might make things easier. Still, knowing how my family operates, I already expect there will be plenty of drama and chaos to deal with. Wish me luck, everyone.